Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Tonic Accord. Today, we're going to be talking about something that has been infamous, I guess we could say, and it is the kind of big lies continuing. We're seeing Republican legislatures across the country enacting voter restrictions. And the big focus is a lot of these states that the restrictions are happening in are places where Democrats either swung the vote or won the election for Biden. And today, I think it's going to be interesting just to look at, is there something serious about these voter restriction allegations, or is it just political theater? How's it going, Drew? It's been a couple weeks. How's everything going for you, man?
It's going good, dude. It's going good. It's good to be back at the podcast again. You know, we took a little bit of a break. You had a nice little mini vacation. I'm actually going out to Newport Beach in a couple of days for a little mini vacation, so that'll be nice. So it's good to recharge the batteries. We both have our blue white boy summer. What is this, like turtleneck kind of ski shirts on? Have you heard about this white boy summer from Chet Hanks?
You know, I haven't, but what?
Wow.
Explain real quick. I don't know.
Well, I don't know either, but it's I guess Chet Hanks, the son of Tom Hanks, who's not an actor, started talking about white boy summer, and it trended on Twitter. So now, for all the white boys out there, be respectful, be wholesome, be a king, and enjoy your white boy summer. I think it's a meme, it's a joke, but hashtag white boy summer. Back to seriousness, though. No, a lot has happened in the last few weeks since we've taken a couple, couple weeks off of the Tonic Accord, and one of the main things is this, Georgia voting rights bill, and for me, it really shows that the afterglow of Trump is still here, right? Like we had, I think a lot of people, including myself for a little bit, was thinking that well, Trump's going to claim he lost the election, but once he's gone, things will come back to normal, or his claims on the election are so ridiculous that eventually, it's a nothing argument. Well, we're finding out now that even though Trump is pretty much, gone and irrelevant in many ways, and also many ways, his ideas about the election security and the thought that people have that there was fraud in this election somehow, which there's not much evidence to support that, is still there. It's still lingering with people, and it still drove legislatures like the Georgia Republican legislature to adopt laws that, in their view, combats some sort of election fraud. However, I think the reality is even the Georgia Secretary of State who's a Republican said that the election was secure and safe and fair. And these laws, in my opinion, are what are kind of a reactionary show of force to appeal to Republican base and to attempts to limit voting, to curtail Democratic voting. And one of the reasons is, we saw a massive increase in mail-in voting because of the coronavirus. And I see this law that includes you literally just eliminating drop boxes for voting. As one of the main things. It's like, why? What do we do? Is there evidence that drop boxes were being used for fraud? No, there's not. Is there evidences that mail-in voting has somehow led to intense fraud? No, there's not. So I see this as a blatant attempt at just either getting support among Trump-based wing Republicans and also curtailing Democratic voting.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to provide a little background, there's a great, unfortunately, study that focused on voting rights from the Brennan Center, which is just kind of a nonpartisan voting rights group. And since February 19th, that was when the most recent study came out. It found that there were 250 bills under consideration in statehouses that would limit access to ballot boxes. And I think Georgia's the biggest one. But I was reading in 538 that right now there's 6 states that currently have some form of voter restriction laws that have actually been passed. But yeah, just for our listeners real quick, this one that's in question, kind of the majority of this episode, Georgia, the bill is SB 202. And I think kind of the crux of it is that it gives state officials or state level officials the authority to kind of take control of county election boards. And so this is kind of another seize of power, because while we have 2 Democratic senators that came out this cycle from Georgia, Georgia's political apparatus is still quite Republican. And so to me, it seems like it's a giant just seizure of trying to allow free and fair voting rights in different counties. And just like a couple notable things, just so we have it for context, is that it criminalizes the provision of food and water to voters who are waiting in long lines. Let's remember that places like Fulton County, where Georgia is, are mainly black and also have longer wait times. So that's just something to take note of. And also, this new bill requires ID for absentee ballots, and like Drew, you said, it limits the ballot drop boxes. Now, at the beginning, there was talks about how they were also going to not allow voting on Sundays following church, and that was a big way to get out black voters, souls to the polls. It was kind of this late 90s movement of getting people after their church to go vote together. It was kind of this cultural phenomenon that I actually thought was kind of cool. Luckily, that is not in this final law, but there's still a lot of nefarious stuff. But to me, it does seem like it is giving the Georgian legislature the ability to control these elections, even if there's counties that go Democrat. And I agree with you. I actually don't really think that this is going to do any good for anyone, to be honest, right or left. I think this is just purely political theater. But like, let's put on our MAGA hats for a second. Like, if you've been drinking this election Kool-Aid for the last like 5 months, there's a lot of Republicans that believe there was fraud. I mean, I see it all the time anecdotally on Facebook and all that jazz. And so this is just a continuation of the big lie. And if you believe the election was stolen, then you're probably supporting this, you know?
Yeah, and that's the problem is I think that if you believe that there is some sort of massive fraud, then this law makes sense to you because you think, yes, well, we need to strict the laws. But the problem is that original argument is not true. I want to take a look at let's look at some data here. I'm looking at from Vox, which looks at a couple different studies about voter ID laws. And they looked at between the period of 2000 and 2012, there was 620 million votes cast in national general elections, right? Of that 620 million votes in that time between 2000 and 2012, there was 344 fraud cases, which is a 0.000003% of cases.
Oh boy, that's big.
Which that's a drop in the bucket. And they even say that they use those words. That's a drop in the bucket. And that really is. So if you're saying then that out of 600 million votes, we had 300 cases of fraud, and then now in one election, Joe Biden somehow managed to fraudulently make up millions of votes, is the claim I'm hearing, is like, that's so unbelievable. You would have to have so much evidence to back that up. There would need to be, it would have been blatant. I mean, if the fact that we're able to find the 344 cases of fraud out of 600 million votes, it's ridiculous to then think that somehow one candidate can turn around and engage in the largest electoral fraud case in history. So, like, the data does not support this. But there's also an interesting thing that a part of the bill that I think has been talked about in previous voter ID reform laws is the voter ID, is the idea that you need to show voter ID when you vote. And this is one that I still don't quite. I find hard to. It's like I don't fully understand. I actually understand the idea that, like, if you register to vote and you want to show up to vote, you should probably show an ID to confirm that. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. There's the argument from the left that I've heard a lot is that people of color that are in a lower socioeconomic status might have a difficulty getting the papers done, or filling out the correct forms on whatever. I'm not sure if I buy that argument either. I think that we should be lenient. I think we should be lenient when people for like late forms and stuff. I think just the fact that people have to go to the DMV or whatever at a certain time. Like there are blockages for people getting their things done and doing errands if they have a lot of work. But so I'm for being lenient, but I still think, yeah, you should probably show an ID when you vote. That's not necessarily a terrible thing. And Vox even talks about that in this article about multiple studies, that one, voter ID laws don't reduce voter fraud. There's barely any voter fraud to begin with. And voter ID laws have shown to have no effect on fraud. And as well as voter fraud doesn't really have much, or voter ID laws don't seem to have much effect on voter turnout. Now, that's not to ignore maybe the sentiment behind these voter IDs and how they make people feel. But the stats show that adding voter ID laws doesn't necessarily decrease the voting output of people of color or people of poor people of socioeconomic status, people that are maybe you would think would be subject to persecution in this instance. It doesn't really affect them. That doesn't. So it's interesting to think that like on both ways, in both sides, these voter ID laws don't do anything. So then the question is, why do we have them?
Well, it's political theater because yeah, like you said, like I am not very informed, honestly, on kind of this whole argument for or against voter ID laws. But yeah, I mean, there's been numerous studies. I think the recent one that Vox article talked about was the National Bureau of Economic Research, who talked about, I think it was like a 2008 to 2018, so a long study that looked at it, and they found no negligible impact on voter ID restrictions and voting. But I guess if I was to just think about it, I guess it would be more. I don't think it's more of a like African American issue. I guess that if you have potentially illegal immigrants who want to vote, that's where that could maybe be a problem. You know what I mean? Like,
but there's no evidence that illegal
right.
immigrants vote and sway elections.
No, but what I'm saying is the only time I think that would ever be relevant is if you had people that are not actual citizens of the United States.
I see
who couldn't present an ID. But
right.
But again, I agree with you that it's a moot point. But I think that's the only time you would have that issue, because I mean, yeah, there's people that slip through the cracks. But kind of going off of that idea, I don't know if they're trying to go out and vote either. Like I don't totally understand it. To me, the bigger ones are kind of this disincentivification for voting. I don't know if that's a word. We're going to go for it. Just the idea of, I mean, Kemp, the governor of Georgia, he voted in one of these drop boxes, and now all of a sudden they want to limit these drop boxes in Fulton County, which is the most populous county in Georgia, and not allow and criminalizing giving food and water to people. And I still haven't even heard a good argument on the right about this. I mean, Lindsey Graham was on Fox News Sunday with Wallace last week, and Wallace just plainly was like, dude, like, what is the point of not letting people get water? It's hot. It's hot in Georgia. These lines are long. These people want to vote. Like, isn't that okay? And he was like, yeah, I agree with you. I don't understand the point of this. So that's why, again, I go back to it. I don't think there's actually like a lot of incentive to actually secure elections. It's just Trump's big lie for the last, half a year, followed by Republicans wanting to appease him. And I don't like, they're not trying to secure elections because unfortunately they've muddled the waters on what election integrity means. Whenever you hear election integrity, or at least